The amount of things that I have seen go haywire in people's businesses, relationships, 9 times out of 10, I can come back and go, this was a communication breakdown, is what was happening in here. That's what led to all of this. Welcome back to Life at 10 Tenths, where we inspire people to live at the pinnacle of their ability and purpose. Matt Pinelli's here with me. I'm Garrett Fry, and we're excited to spend some time with you. Real quick, as we get into this, if you want to be more of what we've got going on, one way is we have this amazing podcast, which you can listen to. We've also built this incredible community that has live coaching going on inside of it. It's got people like you that are wanting to grow and be at the biggest level they can get to. They're all working together in there. We have co-working sessions where we're helping you eliminate excuses and operate at the highest level you possibly can. Get those things done that you've been wanting to do, but you haven't been doing. It's all in the community. So I want to encourage you to go check it out. Matt, good morning, sir. Are you ready to jump in?
Good morning. I am ready to jump in, man. I'm excited as always. Appreciate everybody joining us. Let's talk about communication today, Garrett. That's on the menu.
Communication is one of those things that I watch is not appreciated enough. The amount of things that I have seen go haywire in people's businesses, relationships, expectations, 9 times out of 10, I can come back and go, this was a communication breakdown, is what was happening in here. That's what led to all of this. And I've seen it happen with assistants. Currently right now, Matt, I don't know what you're watching out there, but I am watching people having to have longer relationships and communication with their listings than they're used to for a while. If this is a realtor situation, they've got listings on their plate, they might be hanging out a little bit longer. And if their communication's not there, man, it can cause some issues.
Man, I'm seeing it too with expectation setting, and clarity, right? And, you think about any business really, but particularly in real estate, where people are buying and selling a large, very important asset for themselves, lots of money going around. Sometimes people become a different person that we didn't know who they were when all of a sudden we get into a deal, right? And we can't really change that, but with better communication, with more clear communication, with consistent communication, we can get through challenges a lot better. But this also applies to how we deal with our personal relationships and even with the relationships with ourselves. Are we clearly communicating and setting expectations of what we want to do? Are we consistently checking in and having, project management discussions and things like this that allow things to stay on track? Because I see the same thing 9 times out of 10. If there is a breakdown of something, it's usually the communication broke down first, and that led to the challenge.
Well, so you brought up like somebody in a transaction that all of a sudden we've known, let's say, them for years. We've had a relationship with them. We've had great, we've had dinners, we've had trips. They're good friends of ours. And then all of a sudden a real estate transaction happens and they turn into a wild beast that we're like, who is this person? Like, where did they come from? I didn't realize they had this side of them. I never want to be friends with them again. I don't ever want to deal with them ever, ever, ever. I've seen it happen. And more often than not, this is where, are we truly communicating with them? Are we relying too much on the relationship that we've had? These are our friends, like, oh, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be good. Where we're not asking all the right questions. We're not, really giving them the time and the attention that we really should be giving them. We might be being a good friend, but we're not being maybe the best realtor. Where if it was a stranger, we would have asked a lot more questions. We would have communicated a lot more because we don't know them and we're trying to figure out their situation. With this good friend of ours, usually what we can find is that there's something underlying that's causing a lot of stress, a lot of energy. But because we're failing to communicate and ask the questions, Matt, these things start to build up and it turns into a wild tornado that starts ripping houses off their foundations. And we're going, what in the world happened here? And a lot of times it could have been fixed by just simply slowing down and saying, let's talk for a second. I'm seeing this energy kind of come up, and I want to make sure I'm on the right page with you. And a lot of it is just slowing things down and having the conversations. I mean, that's in the real estate transactions right now, and I'm seeing it happen more and more and more. And I will throw one more thing on the table, Matt, because I find when the communication breaks down, the negotiation world changes where it's us against them against the marketplace rather than us working as a team against the marketplace, you and the buyer or you and the seller. And this all comes back to good communication. And man, when it breaks down and it turns into that, like the triangle of death is what I refer to it as, where it's you against them or them against you, then against the marketplace. Oh man, you're on a trajectory for some danger times ahead. Danger is what that is.
You should look at that as a triangle. Like it's, I don't know, caution.
Caution. It is
Like,
I call it the triangle of death all the time because the minute that breaks down, you can feel it in a real estate transaction when all of a sudden that communication breaks down, that person moves to a different side of the table from you, and you're like, oh man, like why did this get so difficult all of a sudden? And usually it could have been fixed by better communication up front.
thinking about why communication breaks down in business, real estate or otherwise, or even in personal relationships, and I'm just as guilty of this as the next person, is the fear of, well, what if in the communication, the ultimate outcome is not something that I like? Because, a lot of people are like, well, I need to make sure I use communication and processes to get what I want out of this. But sometimes, even working with that friend in a real estate transaction, that clear communication might lead to you not working together.
Yep.
Which is totally okay, by the way. And I think we have to be okay with the outcomes that come, because no matter what, we'll be in a better position if we do go and communicate. Yeah, we may have some short-term pain associated with an outcome, particularly if we're talking about personal relationships, right? But the the elements of communication that exist, you start to feel it, and you're like, I'm not sure everybody's clear. You have a conversation, or you haven't had a conversation, and you're sitting there, you're feeling like, I feel like there's some confusion, but I don't want to address it because if I do, it could create a scenario where I don't like the outcome. But ask yourself this: if there is an outcome that is clear, will you at least then not be stressed about the confusion that exists? So it's a win either way. Either it's a win and you get to move forward with a great business transaction, or it's a win because now you're free of the encumbrance of confusion and awkward energy and potentially building into something that could be even worse.
Well, and I think for the most part, Matt, there is a good outcome for most situations. There is a way that we can help somebody. And I think that, if we're looking at listings just in general for the moment, we just came out of a marketplace that if you had a listing, you put it on, the communication primarily happened from the moment when under contract to the closing table. That's where the most of your communication happened. It wasn't really when it went live on the market to when it got a contract. That happened very fast. And even as it feels like it's slowed down here a little bit, and people are like, oh my gosh, my property's been on the market for 2 weeks. And it finally went under contract. Like, whoa, that was a long time. Even then, like that's not enough time for there to be a problem with a lack of communication. As we are entering into this kind of newer market and we're seeing these changes start to come around and inventories levels are rising and properties are staying on the market a little bit longer, and we need to be more on top of what's happening in the market. What do we need to be doing? How do we need to be adjusting to it? How do we interpret this market and help our client understand what's going on? If there's a lack of communication, this is where the resentment starts to build with your client. All of a sudden, they start building in negative energy. They don't know what's going on. And for us, we've just been out of the habit of having to communicate like this. We've just been out of the habit of having to show up and say, here's the reports, here's what's going on, here's the showing feedback, here's the click throughs online, here's the links that I put out, here's the QR codes that we put out, how are those interpreted, and what's been, who's been seeing those. We're just not used to giving that information on a regular basis. And this is a time right now that I'm going to tell everybody, this is your time to come up with a great communication strategy with your clients, because it is the piece that not only will help them get to their winning place that they want to get to, but it's also what's going to generate referrals, because as they're working through this, even if it takes a little bit longer, even if there's a little bit of extra stuff that you got to do, it's going to cause them to go to their friends going, Matt Benelli, this is the guy you need. And even if it's like taking a little bit longer, you're still going to be the guy that's their go-to professional, that's keeping them informed, helping them, giving them clarity. It's so incredibly important. Yes, it will
Yeah.
weed out some people, like you said, Matt, but I think again, uh, there's a lot of ones that are good people we can help, that we don't need to weed too many people out.
And if you get in the habit of having a good strategy or program with communication, it just makes running a business so much easier. And one thing I recommend to everyone is, when you're working with a client in whatever venue that you're working with them in, whether it's a buyer, a seller, or a different client in a different industry that's not real estate, is you go in to engage in that first conversation, is set the expectations for what you want to accomplish in that conversation, and then ask the client, what questions do you have that you would also like to talk about or accomplish during this conversation? And lay it all out before you go into those topics, because if you just start diving in, you may run out of time and you miss out on what was actually important that other person wanted to talk about. Whereas if you list it all out, great. Then you go in and you say, great, based on this, we'll get through this, this, this. And if you're looking at like, I'm not sure we'll have time for this, or this is coming up later in our process, identify that stuff, get into the conversation. And at the end, make sure everyone has clarity around what you talked about by just confirming like, hey, are we all on the same page with this, 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 and this? Do we all agree? And then set the expectation for what's going to happen next and what the communication will look like next. So for example, we always tell everybody, like, make sure you talk to your clients every single week. Have a dedicated time that you're calling your clients and having this kind of update session with them every single week. Let them know that that's going to happen, because it holds you accountable for one. Two, it lets them know what's going up. And if you're managing that level of expectation, it can help avoid unexpected communication because of somebody saying, I don't know what's happening. I need to call Garrett because I'm confused.
Yep.
Right. And I've been in this situation, not just in real estate, but working with different vendors where they'll say, hey, here's what we're doing. And I'm like, cool. And then I'm not told what's happening next. And a week goes by and I'm confused. I'm like, well, so what's going on? I haven't heard from them. I'm reaching out to vendors. I'm reaching out to their project manager and saying, where are we at? But the people who say, hey, here's where we are and here's where we're going. And if you have a process that is written down, think about it like a mall directory, right? Or a fair directory, or like
Kiosk.
yeah, like a kiosk that says you are here, right? And you're like, oh, cool. And every time you go, it says you are here wherever you are, right? So when you're communicating with your clients, you always want to state, you are here. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. Because if you reiterate that, people are like, oh, am I just over communicating? No, you're not. Maybe you are, but who cares? That's actually a good thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, don't get stuck on I don't want to be an over communicator. That is not something that you need to be worried about. And if that is something that somebody's complaining about, like, bring them to me. I want to know. I want to know who they are.
Yeah, there's a difference between like being like the annoying salesperson who's just constantly making the same sales call over and over again to the same
That's
person,
different.
and someone who's already hired as a trusted advisor, making sure that their clients always know what's going on. I've never complained to someone who is guiding me that they're over communicating with me. Never.
Yep.
I have complained many times about under communication. So even if you think you're over communicating, you're probably under communicating at that point.
An example here that keeps kind of coming in the back of my head, man, is so we're still having work done on our house. We're kind of going through it in stages, and uh, we're managing a lot of this stuff here. And it's been really interesting working with our electrician. I love our electrician, by the way. The guy is absolutely incredible. And but it's been interesting to watch how our relationship of working together has progressed. Because at first he came in and we walked around. He says, "What do you guys want to do?" And we're like, well, we want to switch over there. We want to switch over here. We want a fan up here. We want these lights over here. We want to have this room kind of feel this way. And he's like, oh, and by the way, we have one of the first smart homes in Redding, California. I told him, I'm like, make it a dumb home. I don't want a smart home. I don't need all this stuff from 1996 that doesn't work anymore. So he's like, clear, got it. Pull all that stuff out, make sure that it goes back to a normal house. It was interesting in watching that because we had that initial meeting. And I think this happens in a lot of working, whether it's real estate or any job you take on, any working relationship, any assistant you're working with. This can happen really easily. We have a clear communication up front of what the job is. And then we say, okay, go do it. And this awesome electrician shows up, comes in, and just starts working on stuff. And he thinks he has an idea of what I want. We've talked about it. And he has a choice. He can just push through and take care of stuff, or he can come to me and say, hey, I want clarity on exactly what you were looking for here. Now, either I can initiate finding the clarity, or I can hope that he's going to come to me for clarity. This happens with assistants all the time in people's businesses. We hope that the assistant's going to come to us looking for help and clarity on what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times we should be checking on with them of getting clarity and getting direction of what they should be doing. Luckily, with my electrician, he's one of those gentlemen that came in and said, I just want to get clear on exactly what you want. And he asked me for something that was wonderful. And he says, can you draw me a map of your house? Give me a floor plan and mark down everything you want changed and make a list of everything that you want to have changed so that we can just go and check it off on the list and you can just leave it out on the table for me. Because this is a guy that is like kind of coming in between jobs. I got that kind of relationship with him. He's not like, I'm spending 2 weeks just on your house. He's kind of coming in here and there. Ever since we had that list, ever since we have that map that sits on our kitchen counter right now, he comes in, boom, 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 checks boxes, doesn't have to talk to me at all. I come out, I'm like, hey, we have kitchen lights. Like, how cool is that? Like, that's awesome. And I'm texting him going, dude, awesome job today. And he's like, hey, man, he even said, he goes, you guys are so great to work with because I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. He goes, most people, I would not be able to do a job like this. He's like, because communication's so good, he's like, this is going to be great and this is going to work out. And that's a good working relationship. It could have easily blown up. He could have easily not communicated with me what he needed. I could have easily not checked in with him. And he could have just easily not found time to come to my house. And I could have been walking around going, where the hell's our electrician? And this happens all the time. And, with working relationships, I just watched somebody lose an assistant. And I'm like, I kept saying, you need to communicate more. You need a better job description. You need to get clear on what exactly this person's supposed to be doing. And sure enough, I saw it happening 6 months ago and boom, assistant's gone. Yep. It's exactly how it works.
And we need shared clarity, right? I think that highlights like shared because, I'll see people say, well, I told them. I already told these people. They know. I'm like, do they?
Do they really know?
Do they really know? And maybe they said they know. It's like, maybe they said that because they didn't want you to feel bad, or maybe they didn't want themselves to feel bad because they thought they should know. And when you're working with employees, this happens so much where you're like, hey, do this. And the employee's like, okay. And they don't want to look bad. So they may not come back and ask a question, even though they're still a little bit confused. And this is where the manager or leader should be like, hey, and by the way, I'll check in with you on this, or let me communicate it to this person 1, 2, 3 times in 3 ways so that we all understand where we're going. And then let me ask after those 3 times, do you understand? Are you clear? And open the lines and if you have questions, come to me and ask. It's totally okay, right? And then you can also look at your protocols around how do I make sure that this is clear? If it's something that's repetitive, let's say you're working with a buyer or seller on a process and you're saying the same thing all the time to these folks. And that could be part of your consultation, but do you also have a video, an email, a reference point that you can also point to after that conversation? So there is another, place where they can go and hear that information and retrieve that information again if they want it. right? The more you can document, because communication, Garrett, I find is more than just what we say in our conversations, but it's also how we show up in our emails. It's how we show up in our text messages. A lot of times it's also the demeanor, the tonality, and all of these things that go into communication. I mean, we can probably do a whole mini series on communication in the podcast, but for the purpose of this topic here, is there complete communication here? Are you using everything available for you to make sure that there is shared clarity, right?
And you made a comment a second ago, which is I told them. I said this to them, and I want to, and that's why I think it's good that we go back to my electrician here for a second of having this map, having this checklist that's sitting on the table now out there. We walked around that living room probably 3 or 4 times talking about what we wanted to do. And the chances of him putting a switch on a wall that I didn't want to switch on, or putting a plug somewhere that I didn't want to plug, that he heard me say, and I could have easily gone, that's not what we talked about. There's a very small population that is an auditory learning modality. It's very small. The majority of us are visual and we are kinesthetic. So having something we can put our hands on, having something we can see, and this whole I told them, if you're ever using that as a reason that you're like, I told them, they should have known, just step back for a second and say, there's a very good chance they did not hear the words that I was saying. And it's not that they weren't listening. It's not that they don't care. It's just not how very many people learn, by just hearing.
Well, and they may have heard it differently. The way we hear what we say can be different than the way the person we're speaking to hears what we say.
Yep.
It's the same words, it's the same voice, it's the same tonality, it's the same everything, but they may just hear it differently. Or we may hear it differently. We may think we projected one thing and they received a different thing.
It's funny, Matt. You bring this up, and I have been told in the past that I'm a mean emailer. Like I bring like energy that people are like, "Are you mad?" Like why? Like, and I'm like, "No, I wasn't mad. I was just trying to I'm just telling you, like trying to tell you what I need done." And they're like, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you weren't mad." And Sarah, I have her proofread emails, and more so in the past. And she used to ask me all the time, like, "Did you mean it to sound this way, or did you mean it to come across this way?" And I think that this all ties back into people can interpret, what we are giving them in a lot of different ways. And this is where, really good communication is so important. Communication with your clients, communication with your internal employees. Matt, you and I, as we're growing and building a business together, we've had many times that we're like, we need to schedule a meeting to get on the same page to make sure that everybody's doing all the right stuff. We're all our energy's all in the right place, because easily all of a sudden one of the partners here can easily go, now I don't feel comfortable with where we're at, and they can either stew on it and get frustrated, or we can bring it back together. Everybody gets clear. We're all on the same page, and we all run, and it's really, really, really important.
Particularly when you're working in an environment where you're not all physically there, right? Which is certainly our situation. We're not even in the same time zone. In fact, we in this, well, aside from Hawaii, we're as far apart as we can be from a time zone perspective in the US. And when you look at a lot of salespeople and service people, like you don't go to work with your clients, right? So there are these gaps in communication, the actual timeline of communication, where confusion can be created if there aren't processes in place to make sure that we can always regroup and have clarity and come together and restate our goals, our mission, and where we are. I see this happen with internal employees who are across the country. Seen different businesses where you have different departments that need to interact with each other, and they're not in the same office where they can just walk over and be like, "Hey, Garrett, can I get your opinion on this?" or whatnot. And then the emails go, and then the frustration builds. And because there is no regrouping on, this is what I would like to achieve in this situation, it's just a back and forth, a he said, she said, finger pointing. And then a lot of times it doesn't get solved. It just turns into this, I think this person's mad at me. And then that goes overnight because you can't just walk across the hall and chat it out. And it's like, man, if we just start by, if we get into that point saying, one, hey, I'm confused. And two, this is where I would like to get to clarity. In other words, state the goal and maybe ask a question on how do you think we can get there on this? Or maybe we're misunderstanding each other. Or can we pick up the phone too, right? One of the biggest communication breakdowns I see, Garrett, is particularly in sales, because we want to move fast. We text and we email to try to avoid the phone conversations when you'll actually probably speed yourself up with a phone call. And I know it's hard to get other people on the other end of the phone. But if you say, hey, I think this is very important that we just hop on the phone and talk this out real quick. Can we make that happen? Most of the time, you're going to find that the answer is yes. Then you can get to shared clarity with tonality, which is going to make all the difference in the world. And I did that on purpose. And then you can move forward without the anxiety.
We've talked about it. UCLA did this study years ago. 80% of the written word with no tonality, with no facial expression, no body expression involved with it, 80% is misunderstood or can be misunderstood. It's open to miscommunication, misinterpretation. So really, for the most part, if you can get face to face, and we've all experienced this, you've been in a situation where you can feel tensions rising, you can feel confusion happening. And then all of a sudden, it's like you'll get that face-to-face meeting and you're like, oh, we're all good. We're all good. Real estate transactions, there's certain points in there. We get a lot of face time up front. But then once that thing goes under contract to basically the closing table, we got walkthroughs. We might show up to their inspection to walk through with them if that's what we're doing with them. We might have some things that we get face-to-face. But for the most part, it turns into emails, maybe a phone call, kind of updating on what's going on, but a lot of it is text and email at that point in time, which opens up this door for things to start to get weird if we're not careful. This isn't just for business either. Like, Matt, I've watched people with kids that are trying to run a household that aren't talking enough. And it's like, oh my gosh, like the reason all this tension is coming up is because you guys are failing to communicate and talk with each other. I would love to say that as coaches, we only stay in the real estate world, but man, the stuff that gets brought to coaching calls every once in a while, the amount of times I've had to say I'm not a marriage counselor and I'm not a therapist, like, is really high. A lot of times that marriage counseling comes into like, when was the last time you guys just sat down and had a family meeting?
Well, and I'd love to say as coaches too, that like, oh, we apply everything so great in our lives too. But like, gosh, I see this with communicating with Jen. If we're frustrated with each other, and then we have to separate out of the house because one person's got to take a kid somewhere and then we're on the text, man, tonality out the window, things get misinterpreted. And it's like, no, I wasn't short. I was short because I was getting into the car to drive and I couldn't respond once I was driving. And it's like, gosh, the bubbles appear and then they go away. It's like, oh, somebody distracted me or I had to take a phone call. Like, we don't know. And all of a sudden we start to make up this idea of what's happening. And, that comes back to, hey, like, do you have a communication plan in your relationships, to manage that stuff? Like you said, do you have a family plan meeting that happens? All these things are super important. And I think the biggest thing that I want people to think about here, Garrett, with this topic is communication is something that should always be at the forefront. Obviously, we can't talk enough about it. And you can't really over communicate with your clients. And so have a plan, identify the plan, get everybody on board, seek clarity with every interaction so that for sure. Right. I almost think about it this way, Garrett. Like when you say, hey, I told them, or we had this conversation, it's like, well, if something happened and you had to go and present in front of a judge or a jury on like what really happened, can you actually document that you were in an agreement at one point or another? Was there actual clarity? Could you say with certainty that I knew that person was clear? Or can you just say with certainty that I told that person that thing? You can't say with certainty they understood it if you can just say I told them, but do you know that they understood it? Right. And did you understand what they told you?
I would just, I think this one last point I'd like to put in is that if there's anything you want to strengthen in your business, in your world, communication skills, there's so many books, there's so many classes, there's online classes you can take that are specifically designed to help with communication and better communicating with the people that are around you. And if you want to strengthen any skill, ever. And it's not just for like a specific time or whatnot. It's just a good life skill is your ability to communicate with others. And I would encourage everybody, dive into it, go learn more, strengthen that skill. Now, the better you can get at it, the better your relationships get, the better your business gets. the better you can work with others to get to where you want to go and help them to get to where they want to go.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, that said, we would love to help you get to where you want to go. So if you want to dive into more than just this podcast, head over to lifeat1010s.com and check out the information about our incredible community and our The 11 Circle, which is our premium membership that involves, live coaching, co-working sessions, Success Lab workshops where we bring in guests to teach and share things so that we can expand everybody's thinking to help make sure that you have the tools that you need to live the life that you want so you can leave the legacy that you desire. And so just head over there, join us. We look forward to seeing you in there. Keep listening to the podcast. If you're listening on audio, head over to YouTube and check us out there, and vice versa. Would love to hear your thoughts on that stuff. And gosh, we appreciate you guys so much for listening, for sharing. And if there's anything that we do ask is, do share if you feel that this is of value and somebody else could get value out of it. Share it up with them. Leave us a review. We appreciate it. And we look forward to speaking with you guys on the next episode.
We're going to have somebody share it with their spouse going, you need to listen to this. And it's going to backfire, Matt. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah, maybe don't do that. Right. It's probably not the right path. But Garrett, thank you, man. Always a pleasure, buddy.
Yeah, man. Thanks to you, Matt. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.